you explain to people what a second line is like?
Easiest and quickest way I could say, just like a moving party or a moving concert, really a lot of people who just expressing themselves, whatever they're going through in their life. They get to feel like at that time they don't have any worries. They can just let go.
A brass band blares, a hand-decorated umbrella twirls, a ragtag group behind the band waves handkerchiefs to the beat of the drum, while a grand marshal, wearing a flashy suit and hat reminiscent to the days of the mafia, leads the way, dancing and out buck-jumping them all as he waves a feather fan. No idea what's going on here? You've just stumbled across a New Orleans second line. Everyone is welcome to join in, as many do, extending the second line further and further. This is one of many things that makes the city of New Orleans so very different from anywhere else on the planet. Historically, the black community began second lines as neighborhood celebrations. The neighborhood organizations offered social aid through freed slaves, such as loans and insurance, and would use second lines as a form of advertising. Second lines were also used to honor the dead and celebrate life, which launched the idea of second lines at funerals. Beyond the music, dancing, glitz, and glam of the second lines in New Orleans lies an eerie, dark presence that can't go without mention. This is the story of the Wildside of New Orleans. The 6th Ward is one of the 17 wards of New Orleans, Louisiana, located in the downtown section of the city. The 6th Ward is a long, narrow ward stretching back from the Mississippi River. The boundary to downriver or lower side is Esplanade Avenue, across which is the 7th Ward. The upper limit is St. Philip Street, across which is the 5th Ward. The back boundary is Bayou St. John, the land across which is also part of the 5th Ward. This geographically small ward is just under 40 blocks from front to back and only 4 blocks wide. The ward continues back along Esplanade Ridge, developed by the city's Creole communities in the 19th century, including elegant old mansions along Esplanade, one of which was the residence of Edgar Degas during the time he stayed with his relatives in the city. Just back from Broad Street is the former home of jazz musician Paul Murray, where the New Orleans Film Kings rehearsed while they were in town. At the back of the ward along the bayou is the historic home of James Pateau, second mayor of New Orleans, now known as the Pateau House Museum. A state grand jury would indict 6 alleged members of the 6th Ward, Wildside, accusing them of a racketeering conspiracy that wraps together a half dozen of crushings in 2011 and 2012, along with other acts allegedly committed to bolster a thriving 11-5 NEA business. The 15-count indictment would describe the crew as reckless, also known as the Wildside Gangsters, or WSG. The men would allegedly mercilessly smash their ops who they thought had stolen from them. The indictment also says members of the group hooked up with accused members of other notorious New Orleans street crews. One of the indicted men, 23-year-old Damian Smallface Abram, allegedly traded a 40 he used in the crushing of Derek Howard and Darryl Long on January 28th of 2012 with McCoy Rat Walker, an alleged 3NG member. Rat was among 4 men recently indicted in the high-profile 2010 deletion of popular local bounce rapper Renetta Magnolia Shorty Low and Jerome Man Hampton. Another alleged WSG member, Trey Trigger Mitchell, 22, was given a silver Nissan Maxima that members of the 110ers allegedly used on May the 29th of 2012 in the Central City crushing spree. According to the indictment, Trigger rode with Sam Newman, aka Lil, around the time in June of 2012 that Lil smashed Jonathan Kruger Lewis and Gentili. Lil was sentenced to life in prison after a jury convicted him for the crushing. The new indictment will mark the latest bid by Orleans Parish District Attorney Leon Canizaro's office to corral suspected street crews in a broad conspiracy covering a wide range of acts pulled off over time using the RICO Act. The latest document would allege the pushing of buku work, jackings, home invasions, and crushings on the part of 6 WSG members. The indictment would name Damian Abram, Terry Mitchell, Rashad Bakewell, Blake Ricks, Randall Marshall, and Joseph Marshall. All 6 were named in the first two counts, which allege a far-reaching racketeering conspiracy that includes 28 overt acts and a conspiracy to distribute 11.5. The other counts mostly involved crushings. Damien and Rashad were accused of smashing Alfred Nuck Jr. Dixon, a suspected member of the rival Fourth Ward Goonies crew, November 17, 2011. Damien and a co-conspirator identified only as Cece at the time were accused of deleting Derek in the 2600 block of Diabity Street on January 26, 2012. Joseph Marshall and Rashad were charged with accessory after the fact. They would allegedly wait nearby to help them get away. Joseph Marshall had already pled guilty to one of the deletions described in the indictment. Joseph will receive a 28-year prison sentence in the June 10, 2012 crushing of David Peters in the 7900 block of Olive Street. The indictment will claim Damien conspired with Rashad in the smashing by providing Joseph with a blicky. The group allegedly suspected Davis was working with them dicks. The indictment would also state that Rashad tried to smash Alfred Big Nuck Bryant on May 22nd of 2012. The crushing of Demetrius Adams on December 27 of 2012 would also be in the indictment. According to the indictment, Rashad and Ricks spotted a member of the rival Ride or Die crew who was thought to have smashed a WSG member, Darian Dillette. Rashad would give chase. His ops would escape with help from Demetrius. It was alleged that this is why Rashad would crush Demetrius. Members of WSG were known for posting messages and photos on social media, taunting their ops. Criminal District Court Judge Karen Herman would set bail for all 6 defendants, with Rashad and Damien receiving the highest bails. Herman would set bail for Damien, who was named in 9 of the 15 counts, at $5 million. Rashad's bail, who was named in 11 counts, would be $4.7 million. A member of the 6th Ward, Wildside, who once faced 3 life terms, was sentenced to 35 years under a plea deal with prosecutors. Damian Smallface Abram, 26, was sentenced by Criminal District Judge Lori White under the terms of an agreement with the Orleans Parish Attorney's Office. He was the second to last member of the alleged crew awaiting trial. Prosecutors said in a 2014 indictment that the 6th Ward Slide Crew, also known as the Wildside Gangsters, crushed mercilessly to protect their 11.5 in Ye business. Authorities will single out Damien as one of the crew's most vicious members, allegedly taking part in 3 crushings in a 2-month period. Damien and Rashad deleted Alfred Nuck Jr. Dixon, an accused member of the Fort Worth Goonies gang, on November 17th of 2011. Damien and CC smashed Derek Howard and Darrell Long in the 2600 block. Damien allegedly conspired in the June 10th, 2012 crushing of David Peters, who was working with them people in connection with the crushing on Diabity Street. Joseph Marshall would also plead guilty to the crushing in 2014. Damien will be indicted on 3 counts of second-degree crushing. All of those counts were amended to manslaughter under the terms of his deal with prosecutors made on January the 11th. Abram would also cop out to racketeering, a criminal street crew count, conspiracy to distribute 11.5, and 3 counts of discharging a gat during a crime of violence. Prosecutors Alex Kalinda and Erwin Jakova would handle the case. Damien, who didn't have paid counsel, will be represented by Carrie Ellis, a New Orleans public defender. Rashad will face a life sentence if convicted as charged on the second-degree crushing and the other counts. Rashad was offered the same plea that was accepted by Damien. Rashad will have until February 6th to decide whether or not to accept the plea. Rashad's trial was set for March 12th. Meanwhile, prosecutors will pick off 4 other reputed members of the 6th Ward Wildside under plea deals since the December 2014 indictment. In March of 2016, Trey Trigger Mitchell took a 15-year sentence. A year earlier, Blake Blizzy Ricks would take 20 years. Randall Marshall would accept a 15-year sentence that month, and Joseph Marshall will receive 27 years. In November of 2007, Robert Norton would take on the role of commander with the NOPD 1st District. The 6th Ward of New Orleans will be part of his beat. It's 2 years after Hurricane Katrina. The 2600 block of Dumaine has been identified as one of the hottest blocks of the city, known for attempted deletions, crushings that hard, and 11.5. Maurice Owls, a longtime business owner in the neighborhood who has owned and operated the barbershop on the corner of Broad and Dumaine for over 2 decades, will confirm that the block has never been so wild. There was an obvious difference in the neighborhood. The older residents of the area who would once frequent their front porches could no longer be seen sitting outside. 1/3 of the homes on the block would still be abandoned or empty for 5 years after Katrina. Neighbors would say that they felt increasingly powerless in the face of steppers and hustlers who had taken over the hood and set up sets throughout the block that would bring rivalries to the block. Since Katrina, 5 people would be crushed, and every other day would seem like Iraq. Thanks to its prime location right off of Broad and Orleans Avenue, the block has always had work being pumped on it. Residents will confirm that Broad and Dumaine Streets for decades has been called Dolores Block or D Block after the late Dolores Mama Santiago. Dolores was a retired security guard and school crossing guard who was legendary for her generosity and kindness. In 1998, the Times-Picayune will post an article about how a man and a woman would leap from their second-story window to escape a raging fire. Firefighters who knew the block brought the injured pair to Santiago, who would nurse them at her house in the middle of the block until paramedics arrived. Known as Mama on the Block, Dolores would take care of anyone that had been injured. Miss Dolores would pass in 1999. People from the hood, young and old, would get tatted in her honor. It is these same tats that the NOPD would now use to associate the dudes in the hood as a clique. NOPD would allege that members of D Block will be responsible for much of the attempted deletions and crushings in part of the mid-city and Treme areas. D Block will be described as steppers, jackers, and hustlers. You name it, they were doing it. It is rumored that the clique operated primarily in an area bounded by North Broad, Esplanade, North Claiborne, and Orleans Avenue. In late 2010, racketeering charges will be put forth against 11 men that were classified as D Block, who would be accused of pumping work and crushing their ops. In September of 2010, Mitchell White would be allegedly crushed by Rashad Washington. The other deletions would occur in 2006 and another in 2008. A house in the middle of the block will be spray painted Rest in Peace Stank for Eric Stank McCormick Jr., the block's first post-Katrina deletion, who was crushed in November 2006 by Wilbert "Man" Van Buren. It is alleged that Man will bicycle back to the block with a blicky after getting into it with Stank at a dice game. Less than 3 hours later, Latrone Court will be crushed a few houses down the block. In 2008, Sylvester Cash and Maurice Marty Charles will be crushed toward the end of the block. In August of that same year, as Dolores Mama Santiago stood outside talking with her next-door neighbor, 2 dudes would start busting, one of which looked 14 years of age, the other maybe a year or 2 older. As she crouched down behind the car, Mama would see a relative of hers stood next to her with 2 young kids. Miss Dolores would yell, "Stop!" The young boys would flee. Like other sets in the city, hustlers on Dumaine would stash their work inside abandoned houses and make their transactions in the alleys. Neighbors up and down the block would post no trespassing signs to no avail. Things had gotten out of control. 5 of the men indicted would be cousins that grew up on D Block: Darnell Moose Ellis, Shelton Jackson, McQuinn Lewis, Glenn McCormick, and Lance Price. The 11 men charged had collectively amassed at least 100 arrests, most of them related to hustling, some involving crushings.
But we begin with what law enforcement officials are calling a major bust. Investigators say they've taken a gang off the streets of New Orleans. WDSU News reporter Travers Mackel is live in the news center to tell us about this gang. Travers?
Well, Scott, the gang is called the 6th Ward D Block, and District Attorney Leon Canizero says the 11 men who make up the gang have terrorized an area of the 6th Ward near Dumaine and Broad Street for years. Right now, 10 men are in custody. All are charged with racketeering. The men, as you see here, are Lance Prince, Sheldon Jackson, Mark Quinn Lewis, Blake Ricks, Nathaniel Brown, Torin Duhan, Jamal Howard, Terrell Muse, Cecil Martin, and Glenn McCormick. On the run is 20-year-old Darnell Ellis. Leon Canizero says the men operated in the 2600 block of Dumaine Street. Canizero says this is the first time in more than 10 years that a local prosecutor has used the racketeering statute against the gang, meaning that they can bring up all of these charges, all of these crimes that they're charged with doing in court.
Records would show Torin Duhan pled guilty earlier that year to a Frenchman Street attempted deletion. He is currently in state prison. Terrell Muse was charged with a September attempted deletion in New Orleans East. Nathaniel Brown Jr. was arrested on October in suspicion of attempted deletion of a childhood friend during a 211 in New Orleans East. In 2010, Cecil Martin was charged with domestic battery. In 2009, a camera would catch Jamal Howard making a sale at the corner of Broad in Dumaine. He is now being held at the State Mental Hospital in Feliciana. He would not be found mentally competent. In July of 2017, the 1st District GA unit, with the assistance of the ATF and DEA, began investigating in the 2500 and 2600 blocks of Dumaine Street. During this time, investigating officers would identify 9 subjects that they say were responsible for moving work on the blocks. In May 2018, a state grand jury indictment will be secured for the subjects for conspiring to engage in racketeering acts. 3 of the subjects, Dwayne Jenkins, Gabriel Bell, and Brian Lott, were already incarcerated when other members of the group were taken into custody. During this investigation, 4 additional subjects, Teron Blackman, Glenn McCormick, Derek Brumfield, and Lawrence Conway, would be apprehended. Wayman Williams would be apprehended on May 14, 2018. Johnny Johnson would remain at large at the time. The Special Ops Division would execute search warrants of 2 targeted locations. Officers will locate Glenn Spot McCormick and Derek Youngboy Brumfield as they attempted to flee the residence in the 2500 block of Dumaine Street through a rear door. A search of the residence would uncover 10.36 grams of 11.5 and nearly 9,000 cash. As the search warrant was being executed in the 2500 block of Dumaine, officers would conduct a traffic stop on Lawrence Lowe Conway, who was in possession of 55 bags of dog food totaling 13.20 grams. 1st District officers would also conduct a traffic stop of Teron T. Blackman. T would be found in possession of 1.16 grams of 11.5 and $327 cash. Another search warrant would be executed at the Wayman Williams home in the 600 block of North Gayoso. Johnny Johnson, aka J5, would remain at large. It is alleged that the subjects would use the rap moniker Money Wave as a front and cover to their actual dealings. All of the men would be indicted. The following were reported to be taken off the streets by the NOPD: 15 tools, 16 pounds of that perp, 116.43 grams of that hard, 10 ounces of dog food, and $35,000.
As the search warrant was being executed in the 2500 block of Dumaine, members of the 1st District conducted a traffic stop of another target identified as Lawrence Conway, also known as Lowe, who was under surveillance. A search incidental to his arrest revealed Conway to be in possession of 55 bags totaling 13.20 grams packaged for sale. 1st District officers also conducted a traffic stop of Teron Blackman, also known as T, who was also under surveillance, and a search incidental to his arrest revealed that Blackman was in possession of 1.16 grams and $327 in U.S. currency. Special Operations also executed yet another search warrant in the 600 block of North Gayoso Street, the residence of Wayman Williams, but did not locate Williams during the search, but he was later apprehended. Johnny Johnson, also known as J5, remains at large and will be located by the Vials Unit, and if there's anyone who knows his whereabouts, they can contact members of the 1st District right away, or they can contact Crime Stoppers to do it anonymous.
Many New Orleanians still reflect on the days when housing projects were safe havens to visit or places to live in while growing up in the city. Life will be quite different from what you have seen and heard about on the news, in the streets, and on social media in current times. One of these projects will be the Lafitte, located in the historic 6th Ward, built in 1941. The Lafitte was said to have been, at that time, the largest and finest low-rent housing project in the South, as well as the second largest in the nation for black. By August 19th of 1941, the Lafitte would be completely filled with tenants, occupying 16 city blocks bounded by Lafitte, Orleans, North Claiborne, and Georgia Streets. The Lafitte would have 896 units housing approximately 3,000 tenants. Before construction would begin, workers would level the entire area between North Westerblave, Claiborne, Orleans, and Lafitte in order to make room for the new projects. The demolition of the homes that once preoccupied the space would be welcomed due to the deplorable living conditions that tenants were forced to live under for years. In selecting applications for living in Lafitte, Hanover would specifically choose those that had formerly lived on the site, provided their yearly income was low enough. Costing over $4 million, the project would be completed in little over 12 months. R.P. Farnsworth and Company would be selected as the general contractor for the actual work being carried out by local craftsmen who have been given credit for the Lafitte structures being considered as some of the best in the nation. The Lafitte would be the fifth of 6 housing projects to be built in New Orleans. The first would be the Magnolia, followed by the St. Thomas, the Callio, the Iberville, and then the Lafitte. The final build will be the St. Bernard, which will be completed in January of 1942. The St. Thomas and Iberville had been constructed for white tenants only, while the other 4, the Noya, the Yo, the Lafitte, and the Bernard, would be for African Americans. Upon opening in 1941, rent in the Lafitte would vary according to income. An income of $450 a year would pay $8.25 a month. The highest rent would be $22 for a family earning $1,474 annually with 3 children. The Lafitte, as expected, will stimulate business in the area. Thousands of dollars will be spent by residents in and around the projects. Galado's food store, located at 2039 Orleans Street, will be the place to make groceries. On the corner of North Galvez and Orleans, Carbos, a big discount service station which sold tires, batteries, radios, gasoline, kerosene, and furnace oil. In the 1960s, the middle class will flee to the suburbs, transforming entire areas of the inner city into ghettos. In the 80s, the project will begin to rapidly decline as that horde will flood the Treme area. Living conditions would also become a problem, as well as crime. Hustling and crushing will become common in the Lafitte. The Lafitte will become one of many New Orleans housing projects being ran by hustlers and steppers. People still talk about David Williams, aka Wild Bill, who set a man on fire in the Lafitte project in 1994. Wild Bill was a known jacker who did pretty much what he wanted in the Lafitte, which was patrolled by the corrupt NOPD. The NO would have the highest deletion rate in the country at the time. While Bill would be accused of armed robbery, the victim would be afraid to testify. While Bill was also accused of bashing a Vic with a wooden post because the Vic owed him $12. The victim and witnesses to this act would be afraid to testify as well. In August of 1994, Wild Bill would handcuff Thomas May, douse him with gas, and set him on fire in the courtyard of the Lafitte. It was rumored that the courtyard was full of people standing around that were too afraid to intervene. Ultimately, no one would attempt to put out the fire that had been burning the man for several minutes. It wouldn't be long before Wild Bill's name would be ringing for the act that he pulled off. Michael Perlstein, a reporter with the Times-Picayune, would name Wild Bill as a prime suspect in an article based on interviews with people who lived in the Lafitte. Out of all of the people interviewed, none would testify. During trial 2 years later, Wild Bill will be convicted on the testimony of the only witness to come forward, a 12-year-old girl. By 2002, conditions would worsen. The richly manicured gardens were gone. Many of the lawns were paved over and replaced by basketball courts, while huge garbage bins will be scattered across the decaying lots. In 2006, after Hurricane Katrina, the Lafitte would be rat-infested, boarded up, and closed. It wouldn't be until 2012 that a group known as Urban Design Associates be given a charter award to develop a new housing project on the old Lafitte site. The UDA would name the apartments the new Lafitte. The new apartments would ultimately become a redevelopment of the 27-acre housing project that had been closed for the past 7 years. The new 812 units will provide affordable mixed-income housing for both rentals and for sale properties. The new property will give an opportunity for former Lafitte residents to return to their neighborhood.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. for the New Jack City.
On Wednesday, December 17th of 2014, a state grand jury would indict 6 alleged members of the 6th Ward Wildside, accusing them of a racketeering conspiracy that wraps together a half-dozen crushings from 2011 and 2012, along with other crimes allegedly committed to bolster a thriving boy and girl business. The 15-count indictment would describe the crew, also known as the Wildside Gangsters, or WSG, as steppers that mercilessly deleted their ops. The indictment would also read that the members of the group hooked up with accused members of other notorious New Orleans street crews. One of the indicted men, 23-year-old Damian Smallface Abram, allegedly traded a 40 he used in the deletion of Derek Howard and Darrell Long on January 26 of 2012 with McCoy Rat Walker, an alleged member of 3G, named in a similar indictment that was handed up in 2013. The new indictment will mark the latest bid by Orleans Parish District Attorney Leon Canizaro's office to corral suspected street crews in a broad conspiracy covering a range of crimes over time. They will use a once obscure state law that mirrors a federal statute created to go after the mafia. Defense advocates would argue that the indictments often go too far, trying to draw outlining associates into lengthy prosecutions with subpar evidence that they were involved in street activity at the core of the indictments. The latest document would allege numerous crimes as well as home invasions and crushings on the part of 6 WSG members. Along with Abram and Mitchell, it names Rashad Shot Blackwell, 26, Blake Blizzy Ricks, 25, Randall Marshall, 23, and Joseph Marshall, 28. All 6 will be named in the first 2 counts, which allege a far-reaching racketeering conspiracy that includes 28 overt acts and a conspiracy to distribute 11.5.
Street famous. Street famous.
The Lafitte project was constructed in 1940, opening to residents in August of 1941, with 896 units housing 3,000 tenants. It would be one of the first housing projects for African Americans in Louisiana. During its early years, the Lafitte was labeled as the largest and finest housing authority low-rent project in the South. The Lafitte was the 5th of 6 local housing projects to be built in New Orleans. In the 1980s, the project would rapidly begin to decline as that hard was flooding the Treme area. Living conditions would also become a problem, as well as crime. Dealings and crushings will become common in the Lafitte, making it become one of many New Orleans housing projects to be riddled with crime. After Hurricane Katrina, the Lafitte would be left in stable condition, but remained closed and would later be demolished in 2008. The first phase of the Lafitte's redevelopment plan will include 134 on-site affordable rental units that will be completed in December of 2010 and 47 on-site affordable home ownership units that were completed in March of 2011. The overall Lafitte community will be constructed around existing schools, emphasizing education as the rock of the neighborhood. The redevelopment will restore the historical street grid that was erased when the original housing development was built. The restoration would also integrate the new buildings and residents into the city and provide for easier access to the surrounding areas. It would essentially reconnect residents to essential supportive services, particularly those now offered at the reopened Truth Community Center. Tombstone Records was a notable local New Orleans label in the 1990s that would release a handful of high-caliber bodies of work that would sell over 100,000 albums around the South. Founded by Elton Wicker Jr., a.k.a. June, the local label will be thriving. Most of the production from Tombstone will be done by Merrill Real Rock Robinson, who also produced tracks for Mobile. Other producers that will work with Tombstone will be Ice Mike and the one and only Manny Fresh. The label's biggest commercial success would come by way of Cheeky Black, whose 1996 album, We Get That Out Ya, would be a massive local hit for Tombstone before she would jump ship for Total Respect Records. Tombstone would operate on a shoestring budget with cheap album covers and no music videos. Unlike many local New Orleans labels of the 90s, Tombstone will be more committed to the compact disc format, aka CDs, more than most of their peers who were mainly pushing cassettes. Elton, who attended Joseph S. Clark High School and American Technical Institute, would meet and start dating his future wife, Kim, when they were teens. They would ultimately end up having 2 kids, Elton III and Carrie On. Elton, being from the streets, wouldn't necessarily be a saint in the eyes of the NOPD. Elton would catch an aggravated assault charge in 1990 and a possession with intent to distribute charge in 1991. It wouldn't be long before Elton would launch his own label, Tombstone Records. Elton would also put together the Tombstone Basketball League and Cool Spot Baseball League for neighborhood kids. Volunteering for the Granny Saints, buying Christmas toys for damn near every kid on the block would be Elton's way of giving back. The first release on Tombstone Records would be The Monsters, Triple Beam. The Monsters would include Lil Boo, High Top, YG, and June himself. Production on the project would be groundbreaking for New Orleans rap music. The album would move away from sampling and move more towards keyboards, all courtesy of the legendary Merrill Rock Robinson. After previously appearing on Full Pack's 1993 album, Low Key, a local rapper out the 9 would release his debut album on Tombstone with a unique delivery and flow that hadn't been heard before. After releasing Got to Be Cheeky on Mobile Records, Cheeky Black would drop her classic EP produced by Manny Fresh. On Tombstone, Cheeky would seemingly be the highest profile rapper that would work with the label, and for good reason. Cheeky would take Bounce to a higher level, especially on her heartfelt record, Childhood, in which she mentions Mobo and Pimp Daddy. The talented and underrated LOG will release G's and Soldiers on Tombstone, which would turn out to be a hood classic. Felony, another local rapper on the label, would release Gangsta Tale. It wouldn't be long before Low Key would release his second and to this day final album on Tombstone, Voodoo Gangsta Funk. Low Key would also make appearances on a couple of Red Room record releases. The production on about half of the tracks will be done by veteran New Orleans producer Ice Mike. Most of the lyrics and music on the project had an eerie, even ghostly supernatural sound with deep, trunk rattling beats. Magnolia Slim would also feature on the album. After a single the previous year with TTH, 2 Black, another local rapper, will release Represent for Life on Tombstone, which will be a Gangsta Bounce album with some very inventive production that nonetheless will remain true to classic bounce music. Cheeky Black will later release another Manny Fresh production, F Being Faithful, before moving to Adversity Records, later moving on to Righteous Records. The year is 1997. After a quiet year, which would see no Tombstone releases, the label's 23-year-old Vice President Sandy Patrick Price Jr. will be deleted on November 14th as he ran from 3 men attempting to nab him from his home in New Orleans East. Sandy will leave behind a fiance and 3 sons. Let's fast forward. The year is 1998. 32-year-old Elton Wicker Jr. has plans on releasing his own debut album, Downtown Shot Callers. Those plans would never materialize. In April of 98, while walking out of Roosevelt's on North Claiborne, June will be stopped and asked for a light by a stranger. As June was attempting to give the unknown man a light, out of nowhere, a car would spin the bend and hit him up. Elton would lose his life due to this unfortunate incident. Tombstone will later be recognized as Danger Zone Entertainment and go on to release 2 Loadeds, Don't Play No Games. Merrill Real Rock Robinson would do the production for the album. Don't Play No Games would never quite take off on the New Orleans rap scene. In 2007, Elton Jr.'s son, Elton Wicker III, will be labeled as the most wanted man in New Orleans for his alleged involvement in the home invasion of an NOPD officer and his wife, and for allegedly jacking a man in Algiers.
20-year-old Elton Phillips is the man police suspect in a recent armed robbery who ran for help at the home of then District Attorney Eddie Jordan. But investigators believe Phillips isn't the only last name he may go by.
He was born Elton Wicker III. At some point during his adolescence, he changed his name to Elton Phillips, which is his mother's maiden name, and that's the name he goes by on the streets.
Detectives are in a race against time to talk to Phillips, a.k.a. Wicker, about the home invasion of New Orleans police officer Thelonious Dukes and his wife at their home in New Orleans East.
He's somebody that we have as a person of interest, as a possible suspect. We know there are more than one suspect in the shooting of Dukes. 2, possibly 3. We know definitely 2.
And at around 3 a.m., October 13th, in a sparsely populated area.
Anybody that night that would have seen 2 or 3 black males driving around in the New Orleans East area, possibly around Bullard, possibly Reed.
Police say Elton Phillips may have shaved off his dreadlocks since then, but there is at least one feature that distinguishes him.
He's 5'6", 120 pounds, light-skinned male, with hazel eyes. I think more than anything, if anybody would have come across him, his eyes are very stand out.
Phillips is known to have contacts in the Baton Rouge area. There is a $2,500 reward if you can help police find and arrest him for the armed robbery. And there is a $5,000 reward for good information of Officer Dukes. The number to call in your tip is 822-1111. And Crime Stoppers needs you to help them continue tracking down most wanted criminals. Their big fundraiser, the Carnival, is Saturday, November 10th at Mardi Gras World. For more information, log on to WDSU.com.
This story, too, is on the channel. This was the story of Black Elton, a.k.a. June, and Tombstone Records.